It was the Labour Party conference in Liverpool last week. It's the Tory Party conference in Birmingham this week. What are the two main political parties up to at the moment? We're going to discuss all that and more besides on this week's Downtown Den Politics podcast.
Just looks like bigoted woman.
Me and my friends sort of used to run through the fields of wheat.
You turn if you want to. The ladies not for turning.
It will cost.
I know words, I have the best words, but there's no better word than stupid.
Right, well, welcome to this week's Downtown Den Politics podcast, and I'm joined by the dynamic duo of Joe Phillips and Jim Hancock. I'm struggling a little with man flu, but I will just carry on because that's the sort of guy I am. The courage that I show, James, it's absolutely unbelievable. I think that this is a result of our 20 events in September, which culminated in Birmingham on Friday afternoon with a fantastic Birmingham City of Business Awards dinner. And it was a great afternoon at Banks, so thank you to everybody who turned up and made that such a joyful occasion. And congratulations to all of the winners, of course. I have to say, a bit more excitement on Friday afternoon than I experienced in the hall of the ACC on Monday and Tuesday, where I attended the Labour Party conference. And given the fact that the party had won its first general election for 15 years, I have to say it was a bit flat. The atmosphere wasn't as buoyant as you would have anticipated for all sorts of reasons that we probably discussed previously, but led by, I think, the winter fuel allowance decision, all this controversy over freebies. But you guys, I guess, watched the conference from your living rooms and on the television screens and listening to the radio. So let me get your take on how you think Labour did in Liverpool last week. And I'll start with you, if I may, Joe.
I think it was probably better than it could have been, but not as great as it should have been. I mean, it should have been an absolute celebration of their fantastic election victory and, looking forward, marching forward and all the rest of it. But of course, as we have discussed endlessly, they have created some absolutely dreadful shadows entirely of their own making over freebies and winter fuel announcements, etc. But I think I wasn't there, as you rightly say. I'm afraid I've given up on conferences a long time ago, but I just I thought it was okay. I think they will have come away from it thinking, okay, it wasn't that bad. I mean, there was a very totemic, if you like, vote against the winter fuel proposals that was sort of spearheaded, I suppose, by Sharon Graham from Unite, who is, feisty, passionate, articulate, and a very powerful union leader. But there were some good bits as well. I mean, I thought Jahama Mahmood's speech about women in prisons was really good and really thoughtful. I think Rachel Reeves, she couldn't stop smiling, and frankly, who can blame her? After 800 years, the first woman to hold that great office of state, she deserves a smile, and was, I think, better, not necessarily upbeat, but she was much more, she connected, I think, a bit better. And I thought Keir Starmer was okay. And of course, then the next day he went straight off to wherever he went, to America, to speak to the United Nations. So I think it was okay. It wasn't the great celebration, but I'm not sure, Frank, that conferences are what they used to be, other than, as I said in my blog last week, you have to remember, it's a bit like going to a football match. You're there with people who actually support the same team. So there is that sense of collective frustration, collective joy, but you're on the same page more or less. And although there will be differences and things, I think it was fine. It could have been disastrous, and it certainly wasn't a disaster.
No. Jim, your thoughts on Labour's conference?
well, a great success for Liverpool. I think there's a Downtown article I've just read, 30 million to the Merseyside economy from it. So, and coming back for a fourth successive year, that really surprises me. I'm absolutely delighted, but I am surprised. But I'm going to be slightly more critical than Joe. To go 2 or 3 months after a historic victory, and the whole thing should have been upbeat. We should have had all the plans laid out for where the government was going to go forward, and it should have been a massive celebration. And instead, it was very much overshadowed, in my opinion, by these various scandals, which go on and are debilitating. You can see the retreat is underway. McFadden yesterday announcing that the ministers and shadow ministers would now have the same declaration rules on donations and things like that. They're on the retreat, and they've made the classic mistake of not dealing with this at the beginning, well before the conference, so that it wouldn't overshadow the conference. But a lot of people, I think, there were, as far as I could see, were a bit. There is a lot of anger amongst delegates about that particular issue, and also concern about the winter fuel allowances. So, what should have been a celebration, because I think a celebration would have been in order, but also a real feel of where we're going next. I don't think that was achieved at the conference. And immediately afterwards, of course, we've got this very significant development with Rachel Reeves, where she's talking about tweaking the rules in terms of giving herself more elbow room at the budget, which is a major story, didn't come out at the conference. So I may be being a bit narky, but I think the conference was quite difficult, actually.
I think she did indicate within a speech that she was looking to do something with the fiscal rules. I don't think she was shy in sort of outlining that she wanted to see investment and she wanted to work with the private sector closely to ensure that that happened. I think she was actually more upbeat than we've seen in recent weeks, which was good, because we've all been calling for that, haven't we? A bit more optimism, a bit more sunlit uplands, and a little less depression. I think Keir tried to do the same. Neither of them are blessed as being the most charismatic performers from the conference stage, so that doesn't help in a sense. And I don't think Angela Rayner was given the platform she should have been given, because actually I think she was probably the personality who could have uplifted the conference in that way. But she got the slot on a Sunday, which is never great, and then the graveyard slot on the Wednesday when most people have gone home. So I think they could have perhaps managed that a little better. I didn't sense, Jim, actually, a lot of anger from delegates around either the winter fuel allowance or the freebies arguments. I sensed a lot of anger about the mismanagement of those issues. I think that's what the anger is around. And I heard a number of people saying, I think we suggested this a few weeks ago, actually, that the Chancellor ought to have done a summer budget and got all of the stuff out of the way in terms of winter fuel allowance and any other measures that she wanted to introduce, because it stops the speculation, it stops the stories, and of course it would have enabled them to come into the conference with that plan and that forward motion and momentum that they seem to be lacking at the moment. But I would say it's flat, yes, but not angry, and still an awful lot of goodwill towards the leadership. And I think that where the press have overstepped is on this idea that the Prime Minister, or the leader of the opposition as he was at the time, shouldn't have decamped with his family to a safer haven, in this case, Lord Wolsey's apartment. And of course, he's declared it. There's nothing wrong with it. And he's put a price tag of £20,000 on it, which it must be some apartment if it's £20,000 to stay there for the month. But then people start to become sympathetic to the Prime Minister and his wife by saying, well, why wouldn't he do that? You know, his kids deserve a bit of privacy. They've got to prepare for their exams. So I think the press is starting to go a bit too far, pissing people off, which is the right-wing media's way. And then there was a big double-page splash. I don't know if either of you seen it yesterday in the Sunday Times about Lord Wolsey. Lord Wolsey.
No, Lord Ali.
Lord Ali. I'm getting mixed up with Baroness Wolsey, who we'll talk about a bit later on. Lord Ali. Double-page spread. And I read it twice. And there was nothing in it. I mean, other than the fact that he's made very generous donations to the Labour Party, and you may suggest that it's unwise for a political party to take as much cash from a single individual. But then, of course, you think about Frank Hester, and you wonder why there wasn't double-page spreads in the Sunday Times on that fella who was saying all sorts of wonderful things about Diane Abbott and was giving the Tories, I think it was 20 million in the end. So I'm not sure, Jim. I think I'd agree with Joe's assessment more than yours. Certainly not a joyous occasion, but certainly I didn't sense anywhere among all of the delegates that I met anger.
Well, they need to listen to the public, because what you've just said about Hester did what Lord Ali did, that's the thing that's really annoying people. You know, this argument that Labour's trying to put up is, oh, well, this is what it was done before, so it's all right for us to do it now. The point was that the Labour Party in opposition made a huge attack on the sleaze of the Conservatives, and they should have been double cautious about attracting the similar criticisms themselves. And I mean, we need to, at this point, I guess, mention Rosie Duffield. Now,
hold on, Jim, just before you go on, because you've made, you know, a particular point there, which is well made, and I accept it up to a point, but it's nothing like the Conservatives issue, is it?
No, exactly.
Because all of these donations have been declared. All of these donations are recognised as legal and fine, and nothing anybody has suggested is that rules have been broken. Now, I agree with you. I think the whataboutery is not the best defence for Labour to use. But I do think that we are in danger of forgetting the years and years of sleaze and contempt and law breaking that the previous lot got up to. And we will come to Mr. Jenrick's performance and donations in a moment. And he's been leading the bloody band, hasn't he, in terms of this Labour so-called sleaze.
Yeah, but so I think you're absolutely...
I think you've got to push back a bit more, Jim.
I'll just do one more and then let Joe in. There wasn't complete clarity on the Labour donations. They disguised them often as office expenses when they were in fact clothes. And I also think that what would be desirable would be that Lord Ali makes a general donation to the Labour Party, but when he makes particular donations to with apartments and glasses and things like that, that's what people feel queasy about. I'm not for a moment denying the enormity of the Tories and those COVID contracts and things like that. You and Joe are absolutely right to make that message. But I think anyway, they're tightening up the rules, so they clearly think there's something wrong.
I just would say, don't forget also that in the years and years of Tory sleaze, how much the taxpayer funded Boris Johnson and Rishi Sunak for helicopters and refurbishments of Downing Street and travel and etc. 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 I mean, I think, you know, Labour have been stupid, and they, you know, the idea that somebody who is on an MP's salary like Keir Starmer or Rachel Reeves can't afford to go and buy their own clothes is ridiculous, and they should have seen that coming. I completely agree with Frank. The use of somebody's apartment, you know, with teenage children who suddenly their lives are disrupted and in the middle of their exams, and they're suddenly going to be away from their home, away from their school friends, and they're going to be surrounded by police officers, special branch, all of that, no privacy. I think it's absolutely and utterly reasonable that somebody who'd got the space and an empty place could have said, look, just go and stay there for a bit, just chill. And frankly, I could name 4 or 5 well-known Fleet Street journalists who during lockdown suddenly appeared here in the Kent coast And as far as I know, they didn't have houses here until then. And some of them looked mightily embarrassed when I said hello to them in the queue at the Bakers. So I think we should be, and I think, you know, the difference is Lord Ali is in the Lords. He was put there by Tony Blair. Frank Hester, who is an absolute disgrace, wants to go into the Lords. And quite a lot of the donors to the Tory party bought their peerages. So I think there is a big difference.
Yeah, and I think that's why, you know, it's right that Labour pushes back on some of this stuff. They have absolutely got the messaging wrong. Whataboutery absolutely doesn't work. But where I would disagree with Jim is, as I say, I didn't sense anger, I sense frustration. And the other thing is, I'm not sure it has cut through with the public. I think the clothing thing absolutely did. But as I say, I think the press have sort of over-egged the pudding. The tickets to Arsenal, for example, I haven't met anyone who thinks he's wrong to do that. I've only heard Harriet Harman, honestly. Yeah, he should watch the match on the telly. Clearly not a football fan. You know, Harriet Harman, he shouldn't watch that. He shouldn't go to a live football game. He should watch it on the television. So I think that the clothes aside, and the fact that Lord Ali's sort of central to all this, he's almost been like the Father Christmas to the Labour Party, hasn't he? But I say again, the donations he's made are dwarfed by Hester and others who've contributed to the Tory party. Well, I think what this does bring us to, though, is ultimately, and Wes Streeting made this point very well, I thought, on Wednesday or Tuesday after Keir Starmer's speech. Are we saying that we want public funding of political parties? Well, because that is the only way that you stop all of this. Because political parties rely on generous donors. And for the first time in probably 20 years, Labour actually raised more money this time than the Conservatives. People up in arms about donations and what are people doing it for and all this. So, well, okay, we're going to put 5 pence on everybody's tax so that we can pay for political parties to participate in democracy in the way that we'd like to see. Jim, what's the answer?
I think if it was state funded, it would be a lot more modest. I mean, a lot of money is wasted in terms of political campaigning, and I think if it was publicly funded, there would be a lot less money spent on it.
But you're saying we should publicly fund political parties and political campaigning?
No, well, I don't. Not in the present circumstances. It's like a lot of things that we can't put onto the public books. I mean, probably. So
the only alternative then is to say to public people who want to donate to the Labour Party or to the Conservative Party or any other political organisation in this country is beware, because we're coming after you.
No, do it transparently on block, and then let the parties hand it out. I was talking about this actually doing these micro donations for glasses and things like that.
I agree with that. Yeah. Okay. Rosie Duffield, Jim, you're desperate to get on to that.
Not as desperate as I am. She's my MP. I'm furious.
Oh, go on then, Joe. Go on. We'll let you go first, Joe. Go on.
Well,
you've got a personal interest.
Just on the subject of donations, she got £10,000 for her election campaign from one individual and £2,000 for her election campaign from another individual. They're all named in the register of MPs' interests. Rosie Duffield resigning after less than 3 months, having been elected with the help of Labour campaigners, the Labour Party, under a Labour flag. In 2022, she said she was thinking of joining the Tories because she was peeved then about somebody upsetting her. She has been possibly the most useless MP I have ever come across. I've never heard her talk about anything in the constituency. She's always talking about herself. And I think Pat McFadden is absolutely right. This was not a surprise, but I think the Labour Party should have deselected her back in 22 when she said she was thinking of joining the Tories. And absolutely horrified that she hasn't got the decency to stand down and let there be a by-election, because for those people who tramp the streets, went out canvassing, and lots of people like me who wouldn't necessarily vote Labour, but were willing to lend the vote to keep the Tories out. That is actually pissing on the people that she says Keir Starmer is ignoring, and I think she's an utter disgrace.
James?
I don't think she's a disgrace. I do agree that every MP who changes sides should stand in a by-election. That's absolutely right. As far as her threat to join the Conservatives, probably the reason she wasn't deselected was the Labour Party had no difficulty in welcoming in at the late stage Mrs. Elphick, the Dover MP, who was actually a Tory. So I don't think they have any problem with that. The roots of this go back to the way Rosie Duffield was treated when she entered the trans debate and asserted that women have cervixes, and Keir Starmer was unable to support that notion. That's when it started, and the gossiping against her over that issue was a complete disgrace. In this statement, she obviously refers to the sleaze stuff that we've been talking about, but the other thing she says is that there's a man culture, that Starmer has problem with women, and we've talked about Rayner being sidelined at the party conference. That's an interesting observation as well. But I mean, I don't know what you guys think. Is this just the sort of the ravings of a woman who's got thin political affiliations, and her name will hardly ever be mentioned again?
I don't think she did say he's got a problem with women. I did, and by the way, I didn't say Rayner had been sidelined. I said she was given the usual spots that the deputy leader is given. I think if the party's communication management was better, they would have given her a better profile of slot. Yeah. She wasn't sidelined by any stretch of the imagination. I'd love to see someone try to sideline Angela Rayner.
No, but there have been stories that she's being sidelined in terms of...
That's not because she's a woman, Jim. That's because she's feisty. That's not because she's a woman. It's because she is perhaps more robust in her communications than Keir Starmer.
Well, the guy who's been accused of having a problem with women has appointed Sue Gray to be his chief political advisor, and he's getting a lot of criticism for that. He's appointed the first female chancellor in Rachel Reeves. We've got, who's the Home Secretary? Oh, Yvette Cooper. Education Minister, Bridget Phillipson.
Justice.
DCMS, Lisa Nandy. I mean, you could go on and on and on. Yeah. I mean, if this is a party that's dominated by fellas, I mean, come on. I mean, it's a joke, isn't it? And Rosie Duffield, there was nothing more certain that she would at some point jump ship. And I totally agree with Joe. She should have been deselected. Apart from the trans row, she has never, ever had anything good to say about Keir Starmer, the Labour leadership. She was anti-Corbyn as well. I don't think she's got any politics. I just think she likes being an MP. And I think this will be a storm in a teacup. It'll be Rosie Who within a few weeks.
Yeah. I tell you what, Frank, it's Rosie Who here because we never see her. And during the election campaign, she was pulling out of hustings and things, claiming, and we've all think it's wrong that anybody should feel threatened, but she didn't phone up the other candidates and say, this is what's happening, the police have advised me, I'll do it on Zoom. She just pulled out at the last minute. Don't forget she also had to resign some very junior shadow ministerial role for breaking lockdown, going off to see her married lover during COVID. I mean, she's a flake. And if you want to talk about resignations, not Lord Varsi, but Baroness Varsi, one-time chair of the Tory Party, the only Muslim and woman to hold that position, who is much more significant, has decided to resign the Tory whip and sit as a crossbencher in the Lords.
And we will come on to that in the second part of our podcast this week, Joe. Do not be getting ahead of the game, please. Let me draw a close to this part of the conversation then, in terms of the Labour Party and what next, really. And I suppose that what next for them, they hope, is a more positive month on the back of a budget that Rachel Reeves will deliver on the 30th of October. And I guess we'll get some trailers for that because we usually do. And We've mentioned a couple of things. The fact that the fiscal rules will be changed, which is supported by the financial institutions. They say that they think that the UK has put itself unnecessarily in a financial straitjacket and they should be borrowing to invest. Let's hope they invest in the right things. And then the other big announcement, which not really being talked about this morning, is this Commissioner for COVID corruption. Now, if the Tories think they're having fun at the moment with Labour sleaze, that could be very uncomfortable for them. And I think the Deputy Prime Minister's already been, the former Deputy Prime Minister, is already caught up in a little bit of that. So, Joe, I think we might be in for a period where Labour start to fight back a little.
Yeah, and I've seen some interesting stuff, as you two probably have as well. The idea that Jonathan Ashworth could be brought back in to be sort of running communications on and running the office of Keir Starmer. I mean, there are problems with Sue Gray. There are problems with Simon Case, the head of the civil service, who is supposed to be leaving by the end of the year, but actually would be better off if he left tomorrow. There's an argument that maybe Sue Gray has done her useful bit and now it's time for her to move on. And they need somebody like Pat McFadden or John Ashworth or somebody like that right at the heart of the Downing Street Labour government operation, who's got the political nous and the communication skills to deal with and head off and rebut the stuff that's coming for them. And I think you're absolutely right, Frank. When Parliament resumes next week after the silly conference season, I think things will change. And I think we will begin to see what they are already achieving and what they are doing.
Yeah. I just bumped into Jonathan Ashcroft at the conference, actually. I had a nice chat to Jonathan. Jim?
I think Jonathan Ashcroft would be a good appointment. I mean, I like Pat McFadden, but he looks like an undertaker, and I don't think he's the person to...
Wouldn't you in that job, Jim?
Well, indeed, at the moment, yes. I don't share your rosy, see what I've done there, view of the future. I think Frank tells us that the markets are all cool with these fiddling around with the fiscal rules. We'll have to see. I'm not suggesting that that Rachel Reeves' budget will be followed by a sort of Liz Truss reaction, but I think the markets will be watching very carefully to see what the government actually proposed. And she really does need to get on the front foot because particularly across the north of England and in other places as well, the stories that keep on coming about infrastructure being cancelled, road developments, rail developments, we really do need to see a boost to this. There's quite a lot of stuff going on about devolution to Lancashire and mid-Norfolk and places like that, but that's slightly longer term. So I think we'll see whether the government gets an uptick at the moment. I mean, all I would say to you finally, in this uncharacteristically disputatious first half of the podcast, we're normally much more friendly, but there we are.
Well, it's you,
how
Jim.
do you explain?
We were fine last week, weren't we? We had a lovely time, didn't we, Frank?
Yeah. Well, I'm back. I'm back. How do you, if this isn't cutting through to the general public, all this sleaze, how do you explain the falling off a cliff of Sir Keir's poll ratings?
I think that's all to do with the winter fuel. I think, yes, there was a bit about sleaze because it's ever so easy to go, oh, they're just as bad. And, you see Sarah Vine and people like that, Daily Mail columnist, former wife of Michael Gove, saying, oh, it's the pigs in the trough, animal farm, etc., etc. But, when people stop and think about it, and if the alternative is, OK, do you want to pay for political parties to be funded? Then people would say no. And if you look at the actual figures, not to go down the whataboutery, they've got it wrong. It's silly. They shouldn't have done it. They don't need to. They're not hard up. It's different. If you borrow clothes from a British designer, if you're Lady Starmer and you're wearing it to a ball or state dinner or something, and you give it back to them afterwards, that's fine. Lots and lots of women do that because it's a lot harder for women to wear something expensive and nice, and then
women used to bring, when my mother had a dress shop, women used to bring the dress back on the Monday saying, oh, I don't like it, and it was stinking of smoke and usually had a drink stain on it. So that's a little tidbit for you. But I better hand back to the chair.
We're not suggesting that Lady Starmer starts doing that, are we, Jim? Hey, quick dress from C&A or Tesco and was it back on the Monday? Hey, come on. We've moved on from then, haven't we? I think that what we've all agreed, and we haven't repeated ourselves this week, rightly so, because we've said it so often in recent weeks, is that Labour's got it wrong on the communication side. All of these things should have been better managed, could have been better managed. The money that Lord Ali gave to the Labour Party, to the individuals, ought to have been given to the Labour Party, who then could have passed it on to Keir Starmer, to Victoria Starmer, to buy clothes. That's exactly what the Conservatives used to do with David Cameron and subsequent leaders, and nobody ever saw anything wrong with that. I don't see anything wrong with that. These people need to look their best. They're on show. They're representing their political party and indeed the country. So I don't think any of us got problems with that. I think when you boil the issues down on an individual basis, nobody's particularly got a problem with people going to concerts, because a lot of them attended concerts as shadow ministers alongside government ministers. But of course, the government ministers didn't have to declare because they were ministers. So they're at a Taylor Swift concert, but so too is a Tory minister, but that's not being declared in the same way. And then, as I said, the thing that absolutely drives me mad is this idea that Keir Starmer shouldn't be able to go and watch the football. I would resign as Prime Minister if somebody said to me that I couldn't go and watch Everton Football Club live. And with due respect to my football team, Arsenal are much better watched than Everton. So I think Starmer is absolutely right in saying, no, I'm going to go and watch the football. And as I say, I think the use of Lord Ali's flat, or anybody else's premises for that matter, to keep his family secure and safe, that's fair enough too. I honestly think, Jim, that this is going to blow over. And as keen as you are on history, I know you've lived through it, whereas I've only read about it. But I have to say, the person that had almost as torrid a start to their premiership was Margaret Thatcher. And in the end, she did okay. So I think we will see a better autumn for Labour. I think the press have been an absolute disgrace. I have to say, Jim, your friends at the BBC haven't put themselves into, haven't given themselves any great credit this week either with some of the crap that they've been coming out with. But there you go. You expect it from the Mail and the Express, but Laura Koonsberg's almost, I was going to say a word I shouldn't say really, but she's very excited when it comes to this so-called Labour sleaze, in a way that she didn't appear to be when it was her old mate Boris. But there you go. I'm having the last words as the chair, just giving Laura and the BBC a little kick there and telling them to get back in your lane. We'll be back after the break, and we'll be talking about our good friends at the Conservative Party and the two leadership candidates who are the favourites, not the people Jim and I tipped to perhaps get to the final two. They've got themselves into some difficulties. We'll be back after the break. Welcome back to the second part of this week's Downtown Den Politics podcast. It's me, Frank McKenna, very croaky Frank McKenna this week, joined as ever by Joe Phillips and Jim Hancock. We've looked back at the Labour Party conference in Liverpool. Joe and I gave a fair assessment. Jim Hancock put his BBC hat on and gave Labour a good kicking. We'll turn to his friends in Birmingham now. The Conservative Party conference has started, and of course they're in the midst of a leadership election. Jim and I predicted that Priti Patel and Mel Stride would be surprise candidates in that election. Anyway, we didn't do particularly well, and nor did Tom Cleverly, the other candidate that Jim thought might actually go a little bit further than he did. In fact, he didn't even enter the race in the end, the Watford football player. But there you go. James Cleverly, who I don't think is related, is still in with a chance. Jim, let's start with you this part of the podcast and get your thoughts on what's happening with the Tories.
Yes, there's an attempt to sort of say, we've got over it and we've moved on. But I think there is quite a lot of introspection and using the word again, anger at the way in which 33 MPs Tory MPs were in one way or another caught up in sleaze, and some of them caused catastrophic by-elections, which the Lib Dems won. Also, as I wrote in my blog last week, there has been some recognition that the grassroots of the party have been treated with contempt as far as the conference is concerned over the years. Less and less opportunity to make any contributions, just expected to come along, sit down and listen to ministers speaking or sofa chats and say anything they possibly wanted to on the fringe if they could do that. Now, it looks as if the new chairman, who I think is called Richard Fuller MP, has allowed them today, Monday, to have a day of delegate debates, and they are going to have an opportunity to question these 4 candidates. So there's some stirrings of the minimum of democracy coming to the Tory party, but it'll be interesting to see what people, whether they feel they've had a chance, because it's at this conference really that you can wash your dirty linen, whether in public or even just in the conference. You know, if you can't do a introspective look at what went wrong and what went so catastrophically wrong at this conference, then you never can, because the calls start to come in. Oh, the government are entering midterm blues, we've got to prepare for the election and so on. So this is the time to do it. So there's some signs of that. And then we turn to the contest itself. I did favour Mel Stride. I never mentioned Priti Patel. That's a
No, that was me.
Yeah. Right. Okay. Mel Stride was my initial candidate. Then it's transferred to Cleverly, and
Tom or James.
I think it's still in the race, but you know, from what one hears, it's between Badenoch and Jenrick. But as we are probably going to discuss, they have made some faux pas this weekend, and it's quite interesting. I mean, what's going to happen this week? I think because we've got to remember that the MPs are still going to have another involvement in this, in whittling down these 4 to 2, and the dynamics of what the MPs think about who they think would go down well with the public, and who they have to give to the grassroots as candidates because of their performance this week in Birmingham is going to be absolutely fascinating.
Yeah, I suppose I would say that if ever a party membership deserved contempt, it was a party membership that gave the country Liz Truss as Prime Minister. And I'd also point out that William Hague has said that unless and until the Conservative Party remove the choice of leader from its members, then they're going to remain in opposition for quite some time, because the membership is ageing and is totally out of touch with the centre ground of British politics, which is always where governments tend to win general elections in the UK. So I'm not quite sure where you're coming from, really, Jim. You know, just because you throw some money at the party and throw some leaflets through doors doesn't mean that you should be electing prime ministers.
Well, after Jeremy Corbyn was elected leader of the Labour Party, were you proposing that the members of the Labour Party should not have a say in the leader? Because that was arguably even more catastrophic.
I think the rules have been changed to the point where it'd be very unlikely that somebody as ill-suited to being leader of the Labour Party as Jeremy Corbyn will ever be elected again. I think that's fair enough. And I think basically, if you have a political party of any colour where your parliamentary colleagues don't support the leader, then you've got a problem. And so when Truss was supported over Sunak had more MPs backing than she did. That created problems for her, aside from the fact that she was nuts. And I think that you go back in history and look at political leaders who've been in Parliament without the backing of the PLP, as Labour's would put it, or the Tory MPs. It's not a recipe for good politics, Jim. You wouldn't go to I think Tony Blair said this, didn't he? You wouldn't go to football supporters and do a poll on who they wanted to be manager, because you'd more likely get it wrong most of the time. Party members, I think, need to understand and appreciate that they can't possibly know who a good parliamentary operator and good leader is necessarily going to be. And when you've got the demographic that the Conservative Party has got, come on, Jim, do you think that's a sensible way of then choosing a leader? Seriously?
I think there's a fundamental issue here. These people joined the Conservative Party to shape British politics in the way in which they want it to
But
be.
that doesn't mean
And
electing a leader, does it? I mean, if you said to me, even, you see, I even have this problem in terms of local candidates, because most people will say, we need someone local. We need someone from around and then you get somebody, for example, let's say Wes Streeting decided his constituency disappears in boundary changes tomorrow, and Wes Streeting rocks up in West Lancashire or Liverpool, and we say, oh, from round here, Wes, we don't want you as an this is the problem when you've got party members taking part to that extent in selecting candidates, selecting prime ministers in the case of the Tory party. I really think that sometimes, democracy gets in the way of good choices. And I think in terms of party politics, when you've got such a small number of people selecting a leader, then it's bloody dangerous. Anyway, Joe, that's just me having a rant. I'm not a great, honestly, I think sometimes, as I say, democracy can get in the way of good choices.
Well, I think it goes back to what we were saying before the break. If you think a party conference is like a football match, it's absolutely right. Everybody that you're sitting next to at a football match would think they would do a better job than the manager, goalkeeper, striker, referee, and everything else. And the reality is they wouldn't. They'd be better off sticking to their day job. And the thing I think that comes across more than anything, because the Tory party is so utterly dysfunctional, and it's dysfunctional because of that very reason, that the people who have sought leadership have sought that from the members because they know that's the only way to be elected, rather than talking to the wider public. Now, here we are 4.5 years out from the next general election, probably. Who are Badenoch, Jenrick, Cleverly and Tugendhat talking to? They need to be talking to all of us, not just the people at the golf club or the people at the local Conservative Association. But the reality is they're not going to get into power to be leader unless they get those membership votes. So it's a terribly flawed system. And actually it was William Hague, I think, I might be wrong, Jim will know, but I think it was William Hague when he was leader who introduced the idea that members had more say. So he's now come round to saying, actually, that was a really stupid idea. But, if you've got an average age of 65 plus, that is not going to resonate with the people that you need to attract to your party if you are going to be in opposition effectively, or indeed if you're going to attract candidates. And I think, what we've seen over the last couple of days, and God help us, this is going on for another month before they get to a resolution, is, they are just more and more bonkers as each day goes by. I mean, they're beginning to make reform look plausible, and that's really dangerous. I mean, I say it, with tongue in cheek, but they actually are incoherent. You've got Badenoch talking about maternity pay being too generous, then having to row back on it. You've got Robert Jenrick saying that we should have the Star of David at every single entry point to the UK, for God's sake. You've got them weighing into everything and shooting from the lip without any thought at all, and it's embarrassing. If that is the best that the Conservative Party, which has been one of the great political parties of the world and arguably has given some of the most influential and significant leaders in this country, whether you agree with them or not, but it has been a machine that has been well oiled. It has, done its bit, and it is now looking like a rabble with somebody standing on this rubbish heap going, I'm the king. No, I am. I mean, it's just ghastly. I think there's some.
So would you like the Liberal Democrats, which have sometimes been down to a dozen MPs and even less, to choose the leader of the Liberal Democrat Party? I mean, just before you answer that, what happens is that a political party makes a mistake in the leader that it chooses because they're very old and they're very anti-EU or whatever it is. And what then happens is that person makes a mess of it, either in office or in opposition, as William Hague Duncan Smith, Michael Howard did. And then these aged people realise they've made a mistake, choose a winnable candidate and gain office. That's the democratic process. They pay the price for their bad decisions, but they're not denied a choice.
Jim, that's okay, isn't it, when you're in opposition?
Exactly.
Because you pay the price as a political party and a political organisation.
Exactly.
We paid the price as a country when Liz Truss was given the job by those very members. And so the election of a party leader, I think, is a step too far. I can have an argument, a reasonable argument with somebody who says members should choose local MPs. Well, okay, well, that's where it stops, Jim, because if you choose your local candidate, your local MP, then I think it is fair to say you delegate your vote then to that person. If you think that person's good enough to be a member of parliament, then surely that person should be seen as qualified to vote for the person who they think is best to lead your political party. So in my opinion, parliamentarians from the parties, Tory, Labour, and I'd even say Lib Dem, would be the best people qualified to vote for leaders. And okay, they may get it wrong on occasion, but if you look at the Tory party history in recent times, Joe is absolutely right. People like Tug and Half, and even to a lesser extent, to be fair to him, Cleverly, are being driven to the right, not because they believe that that is the right prescription for the country, but because they're trying to play into this very narrow view that their membership holds. We talk about democracy, Jim. Is that really good for democracy?
In 2005,
people talking about people saying things that they actually don't believe.
Yeah, but in 2005, after making all those mistakes, the Conservatives had a right winger in David Davis, or a more centrist person in David Cameron, and they eventually got it right.
Again, Jim, I would have to contradict you there, because David Davis would have been an absolute shoo-in only for Cameron's superb performance at party conference. Without that, Davis was winning. So it wasn't that the Tory membership had realised that they'd had this disastrous series of leaders. David Davis went into the Conservative Party conference in 2005 well ahead in every poll.
But he was in front of those very members of which you speak.
No, Jim, one performance from David Cameron saved that membership from making another mistake. It wasn't the fact, we've learned our lesson, we've elected 3 lunatics and now we're going to get sent to ground. It was a performance on the stage of a conference platform. Now, if you're saying to me that that's okay, then I'd say to you, no, it isn't, because as I've mentioned, they then gave us Liz Truss. They gave us Boris Johnson. Let's be honest. It was the Tory membership that drove us into the arms of Boris Johnson, Brexit, and all this right-wing lunacy that we've had over the past 6, 7, 8 years. And for me, I don't think it's defensible. Defendable. I just don't think it is.
Just to say, the events of 2005 followed the following sequence. After the party conference where David Cameron impressed those in the hall, there was then a vote amongst party members and they elected David Cameron. So that was actually what happened.
They elected Liz Truss. Defend that. How can a party membership be allowed to elect the Prime Minister?
And there is a whole difference, Jim, and I completely agree with Frank, there's a whole difference between electing a leader of the party when you're not in power. But when you are in government, actually, it is totally and utterly wrong that such a narrow base can choose a prime minister and then we all pay the price. I mean, we will all be paying the price for Liz Truss for a very long time to come. We are all paying the price for Boris Johnson. And I think
that's where we can compromise. I think there is a case for, in office, the leader should be chosen by the Tory MPs. But
I think the problem I have, Jim, with that is that I think that both in terms of Corbyn as a choice for Labour and, let's say, Duncan Smith as a choice for the Tories, it doesn't, having weak opposition does not make good government. So even when you say to me, well, if you're in opposition, you should be able to select your own leader as party membership, I'm still against that, because I think that you have complacency in government. I think the Tories got up to all sorts of stuff during their tenure of 14 years as a result of the fact that they knew that Ed Miliband and Jeremy Corbyn couldn't beat them. I don't think you'd have seen half of the crap that we've had to put up with over the past 14 years if Labour would have elected David Miliband instead of Ed Miliband.
Well, I think party members put in a tremendous amount of work at the grassroots, and indeed
some of them do, Jim. A lot of them don't, by the way. I mean, listen, again, as somebody who's led campaigns, and with due respect, you haven't, it's not, they don't put a lot of work in, a lot of them. You end up with the same dozen people knocking on doors and delivering leaflets, and what they do is they pay the 30 quid a year. So for 30 quid a year, you can elect the next leader of your party. No, sorry, you can't. It's down to the parliamentarians who you can select. As I say, I wouldn't even let them do that. But you can select your parliamentary candidate or your MP, and then you delegate responsibility for the election of that leader to them. This idea that you've got these 65, 70, 80-year-old guys who are running around delivering leaflets and doing all sorts for the Tory party, it's just not the case. It doesn't happen. They don't have armies of people out working for them every election. You have the same, Jo will know this because she's been campaigner, you have the same people turning up week in, week out. So what do? Do we say, actually, those 30 people who really do put the hard yards in, they're the ones who can elect the leader? Or do we just say anyone who can afford 30 quid, you can vote? In fact, with Corbyn, it was 3 quid. £3, you can have a vote and you can destroy the Labour Party for nearly a decade.
Yeah. Well, and that's what got Rosie Duffield in, was the student vote in Canterbury, because they all joined up to support Corbyn.
Yeah. Scandalous.
And that went well. Yeah.
Anyway, let's get back to the Tory party. And so, me and Jim will continue our argument when we next meet up. Jo, you mentioned Baroness Wolsey, and she's resigned. Somebody that I think we would all say is a very good parliamentarian in the Lords, has been a big figure within the Conservative Party in recent times. What's happened there?
So she's resigned. She's basically said the party's gone too far to the right. It's no longer the party that she supported and worked very hard for. I mean, I think, she was slightly patronised by the Tory leadership, and I think there were lots of people probably within and without the Tory party who thought that, oh yes, this is a token Muslim woman being given this position as chair of the party. But she's a fantastic speaker. I've worked with her on very many events, and I don't know if either of you saw the programme she did with Alistair Campbell, where it was, make me prime, or I want to be prime minister, or whatever it is. I mean, she's funny, she's clever, she's smart, she's a good talker, and she's worked really hard for the Conservative Party. And I think for them to lose somebody like that, whilst these 4 people are focusing, as we've just said, on basically getting the backing of 39 readers of the Daily Express, it is utterly ridiculous. And actually, what you could be looking at is the Liberal Democrats could become the official opposition. It's not impossible. At which point, where does the Tory party go? Because there will be those who will go to reform, and there will be those who will just wither and die. And I don't know. I mean, I can't imagine. I know in years gone past, journalists used to like to go to the Tory party conference, myself and Jim included, and find, rather alarming looking young men and women wearing clothes that their parents might have worn in the 1950s and braying round the stalls. And, sure enough, they were to become the Tory candidates that we are now seeing who've just lost their seats. But, where are the young people? Where is the future? Where is the future of what is at the moment His Majesty's official opposition? And it's important. We need a good opposition. We need people who sit on select committees. We need people who ask questions in Parliament. We need people who work with their constituents. But this, the party has been looking inside itself for such a long time, for years. And, when you listen to John Major, or you listen to people of the, previous previous sort of incarnations of the Conservative Party, you think, well, how did that all go so terribly, terribly wrong? And that narrow base, political parties need membership, but they, more than that, they need to speak to a wider base.
And the two favourite candidates, Jim, have got themselves into some difficulties over the weekend. So Robert Jenrick, I have to say to you, that angry mob of Labour delegates all want to be elected as Conservative leader. They all think Jenrick would be great for Labour. And Kemi Badenoch for different reasons. So Jenrick's taken this £75,000 donation, which he's finding it very difficult to explain. And Labour have called for an investigation this morning. Oh, the irony, the irony. And then Badenoch got herself into difficulties, totally unnecessarily actually, over maternity pay, which I haven't heard as an issue raised by anyone, not even the most extreme of the Conservative Party members. Maybe not the sort of people I bump into every day, but it's not been raised as an issue. And also she mentioned that the NHS free at the point of use may not be something that's going to be the case in the future. Just very, very silly mistakes from her in particular, I'd say, Jim. I think Jenrick will be able to brush off the donation now, but I think Badenoch's in a bit of trouble, isn't she?
Yes, I'm not surprised, because as I've said before on this podcast, her problem is that she shoots from the mouth and gets herself into trouble. And she does it often in quite a pugnacious way. But if I just may come back onto Baroness Varzi just for a moment and link it in with this, she has had a bit of a thing about Islamophobia in the Conservative Party, which I've always thought was exaggerated. This is the party of Rishi Sunak, Priti Patel, and Kemi Badenoch. They are the party of enterprise, which has had a big resonance with a large number of Asian business people over the years. So I think she's slightly in the Rosie Duffield category of having a bee in her bonnet, which has eventually come out. I'm sorry she's left the party. I think she's a very eloquent speaker, but I think her claims about Islamophobia, and the party did conduct a big investigation into it at the time, but I think it was exaggerated. Of course, the other thing that Badenoch has done, which I'd like to discuss, is that she thinks there are certain cultures which are unacceptable. And she's saying, people who believe that gays should be thrown off the top of buildings, that women should stay at home and be masked, and people who want the destruction of Israel are problematic in our society. And she said she came to this country and doesn't want this country to be a country where those opinions are gaining ever more credibility. And I think there's some force in that. And so despite the blunders that she's made on that particular issue, I'm very interested in what you guys think.
I didn't really think much about it, to be honest. I think it's culture wars, isn't it? It's just, I'm not, yeah. I mean, again, if I go back to your touch point, Jim, which was the comment you made earlier about, the man and woman on the street. It's just not an issue the man and woman on the street are discussing. So what's she doing? Is she playing to it goes back to this point. Is she playing to the country, or is she playing to that very narrow group of Tory party members? Because does anyone support what you've just name those people again that she's against?
I think there is quite a widespread concern that there are opinions held by certain groups in the country, and she declined Laura Kuenssberg, to bring her name up again, repeated attempts, as she saw it, for her to say Muslims. She didn't say that, but the people in this country who, but I push back against your idea that the general public, there isn't an unease in the general public amongst some of the social media dialogue, some of the things that are said on protest marches about gays, about Israel, and about the role of women. People who come to this country have got to realize they're in a very different society, and bringing arguments from the subcontinent, that was another thing that Badenoch mentioned, and taking them out on the streets of Britain. I think there is a public concern about that, yes.
Well, it's a public concern that is made worse and inflamed by comments from people like her. Because actually, if you stop and think about it, the people who are anti-gay, who want to keep women, masked and kept indoors like the Taliban in Afghanistan. They are not likely to be here, but people escaping them have, got to try and find somewhere where it is better and able. And for Kemi Badenoch to come out and sort of talk about anti-gay as something that she opposes, this is a woman who, absolutely, along with Suella Braverman, hated the idea that the police could be in any way supportive of gay pride or things like that. Absolutely hated the idea that local councils or fire stations or public buildings would fly pride flags. So this is dangerous. It's dog whistle politics. And what we've just seen in Austria, during the break, I was talking about, Robert Harris's new book, Precipice, which I recommend everybody to read. But if you look what's happened in Austria, the far right have gained huge election progress there, the first time since the Second World War. Now, are we living in the 1930s again? Because we are now living with people like Kemi Badenoch who are saying things that then get repeated. And it's not 3 and 4pence we're going to a dance. It is, they're all over here. They want to lock up our women and ban gays. That is not what she, I would hope, meant. But it is how it will be portrayed. And that's the danger. And anybody in public life should think carefully before they use words. I think she's a very dangerous woman. But I think she will be the leader of the Tory Party, but not this time around.
Ooh. That's an interesting prediction. James, who's your money on? I mean, I don't know why we bother, mate, but go on, we'll have a go again anyway.
Can you pick someone we don't want, please, you two?
Well, I have faith in the Conservative Party membership, so I'm thinking Cleverly might just split the other vote and come through, but I'm not sure about that.
He's got to get on the ballot, hasn't he? It's whether or not Jenrick will manipulate the vote.
What, of MPs?
Well, that's what that's what did for my candidate, Pretty.
The other thing that perhaps we should mention is they're trying to accelerate this now so that they have the new leader in place in time for the budget. On what is called.
I haven't seen that.
Yes, what is called Budget Day, but actually far more importantly is Downtown's Parliamentary Reception Day. That they say it's ridiculous not to have the new Conservative leader critiquing the budget, which is one of the most important statements of the year. So
I'd agree with that.
They may be asked to accelerate it. Yes, I would support that as well.
Yeah, they should do that, shouldn't they? Just whether the mechanics will allow them to. So you're not going to put your neck out, Jim, and say you think he's going to win it? Or are you saying Cleverly? You think Cleverly's got a chance?
Well, I will, just so that you can ridicule me and like you have over Mel Stride in the future. I'm the punch bag, so I might as well settle for.
I mean, what happened to Priti Patel?
I went out first. My candidate, Mel Stride, lasted longer than my favourite.
That's true.
I think it is going to be Jenrick, actually. I think it's going to be Jenrick.
I think it's going to be Jenrick too. I think Tom Tugendhat, who I used to think was quite sensible, seems to have gone absolutely off the rails, and is again, you see somebody who was quite intelligent, quite thoughtful, is now going so far right. They're like a car out of control, and it's like they're being drawn by this, this unseen force that just becomes more and more extreme. It's crazy.
Yes, all these Conservative Party members who sit at home and don't deliver the leaflets.
James, I will invite you to the next session of canvassing in West Lancashire, and you will see how many members actually turn up to do the door knocking.
Good old John Phillis, he'll be there.
And it's only John. It's John and Julie, and that's about it. All the West Lancashire comrades will be getting on the phone to me now. I haven't listened to them. It is a myth, Jim. That you've got all these activists and hundreds of people running around working for political parties. It's an absolute myth. And as I say, to put them in charge of electing prime ministers seems to me to be very anti-democratic, not democratic at all. And caused us, as we've mentioned, the mess of Liz Truss. But worse, in my opinion, it's caused the destruction of a once great political organisation. And it did it to the Labour Party, and it's currently doing it to the Conservative Party. And I take no pleasure in that. Tribal in my politics to an extent, in terms of I like to see Labour winning. but you need good opposition, both at a local and national level, which is why I would hope your prediction of James Cleverly is actually to be true, but I've no confidence in that lunatic membership that you obviously rate so highly. So we'll welcome Robert Jenrick to the position, I guess. We'll know a bit more next week, because those 4 candidates, the leadership candidates, will be performing on the stage in Birmingham this week amongst the delegates. So we'll see whether or not that changes the mood at all. But until next week, I'm hoping that I get through this terrible man flu that I've got. No sympathy at all from Jim or Joe, I have to say.
No, none at all.
And I'll be back next week, less croaky and probably, hopefully, sounding a bit less scouse. And I will see you all next week. That's it from this week's Downtown Den Politics Podcast.